So the party that was created at the tail end of that moment was the Socialist Revolutionary Workers' Party, and you're scathing in the essay and you call them comical, and you've already touched on some of the elements which made it operate in a way that was not conducive to aligning different forces and tendencies. Could you say more about what made it so much of a failure? What was its electoral campaign at the time when it launched? What was the build up to its launch, and how was it just so spectacularly a flop that it had this effect of demoralizing left forces across the board?
Yeah, so maybe I'll focus on two things that's wrong with this party. One is a hewing to this insurrectionist model of politics in a completely thoughtless and uncritical way. In the essay, I think I said it's the appropriation of a Bolshevik ideology, because it's literally, it's essentially saying that there's nothing that the left has to rethink 100 odd years after the Bolshevik Revolution. We can take everything that we have to do word for word out of various textbooks that Lenin wrote. And so what it meant is that it offers a political program that is completely unsuited to the conditions of a mostly industrialized liberal democracy like the one that we're operating in. And in particular, what it fails to account for, the same thing that unfortunately Leninists have failed to account for 100 years of politics, is the enormous legitimacy of the state in established liberal democracies like ours. The fact that most workers just aren't interested in revolution and can't really imagine revolution in the way that this party is proclaiming. And so it meant that it's offering up a program to people that was just alienating, that people could not understand, that just had no resonance. And so it ran in elections, but it did so on this platform, the basis of which was basically saying that these elections are a joke, that you shouldn't be thinking about elections, that actually what we need is a working class revolution. The implicit assumption is that somehow the state's going to crumble tomorrow, and that this is the vanguard party that's going to somehow establish a parallel state and set up Soviets or whatever. And it is something that, totally detached from the lived reality of most people in the country, and so just had no traction. The program is totally just inappropriate for the conditions that we're working in. The second thing is that it was fundamentally undemocratic. It reprised this vanguardist model it reprised all the worst aspects of it, in that it, anointed a certain leadership. It didn't set up any structures to try to hold that leadership accountable. It didn't do anything to try to increase the participation of its rank and file. It started then to even create a personality cult around this leadership. And then, one of the big errors that we made, I think, in this whole NUMSA process is that when it was occurring, I think a lot of people on the left believed that it was a process that was been driven from the bottom up. We believed that what was happening here was essentially a rank and file rebellion within NUMSA, people breaking from the ANC and demanding a new political vehicle. And the trade union leadership was tailing that. In actual fact, I don't really think that's what was happening. For reasons that we can speculate about, we can get into if it's necessary, I think that the trade union leadership made its own decision to launch this political party. But the problem was that they ended up launching a political party that they were fundamentally in control of. So this was a political process that was entirely dependent on this layer of trade union bureaucrats. And I think that was the big mistake that we made. They made all sorts of radical noises. They appeared to be taking a new political direction. And that convinced a lot of us that we should put aside a lot of the misgivings that we've had about a trade union bureaucracy that in general has been an incredibly conservative force, and assume that this bureaucracy is different. And what I think has been revealed over the last 10 years is that it fundamentally wasn't. And I don't mean that to say that about all of them. We mustn't be mechanistic about our assumption about the trade union bureaucrats. A lot of the best comrades we have on the left, and even a lot of people that led that process and were in NUMSA, are genuine, committed, dedicated comrades. But certain others are not. And I think that includes the leader, Irvin Jim. And there's now credible evidence that suggests that that leadership was guilty of the same forms of corruption that we've seen across South African trade unions that have been so devastating for the labor movement in South Africa. But instead of suspending this leadership and investigating those claims and giving Irvin Jim and others their day in court, what you've had is closing of ranks around him, creation of a personality cult, pushing out dissidents, suspensions, all these kind of things. And so it's, it's just another one of these. And this is almost a fundamental critique about it, because if it was a Democratic Party and we disagreed with its program, but it had a lot of energy around it, there might be an argument for saying we should go in and we should try to change the party. But it's not a Democratic Party. It's a party controlled by this clique of corrupt union bureaucrats. And it means that there's no real prospect for transforming it. We have to build something different.